"Be my fake fiancée," the millionaire boss asked his secretary, but his hidden truth nearly destroyed her. The elevator glides to the top floor of Blackwood Tower, smooth and silent. As Claire Donovan watches the numbers climb, her reflection staring back from the brushed steel walls, neat blazer, sensible heels, hair pinned just tight enough to pass for confidence, even though her pulse keeps time like a ticking clock. She has worked for Ethan Blackwood for 3 years, long days, longer nights, calendars memorized, crises solved before they erupt, the kind of secretary who knows when to speak and when to disappear, and tonight she expects nothing more than another late briefing, another stack of documents to organize before heading back to her one-bedroom apartment 12 miles away. The doors open to a floor that smells faintly of cedar and glass cleaner, city lights pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows, and Ethan stands by the conference table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the skyline framing him like a portrait he never asked to be painted. He does not greet her with his usual clipped efficiency. He does not ask for coffee or updates. He waits until she sets her tablet down, until the silence stretches thin, and then he speaks, calm, measured, the voice that moves markets without raising its volume. "Close the door, Claire." She does, and the latch sounds louder than it should. He gestures to a chair, but does not sit himself. Instead, he reaches into a leather folder and slides 2 items across the table, a contract, neatly tabbed, and a small velvet box. "Be my fake fiancé," he says, as if proposing a schedule change, as if this were another item to be slotted between earnings calls and board dinners. The words land and hang there, heavy and unreal. Claire's breath catches, not from shock alone, but from the certainty in his eyes, the sense that this request has already been weighed, approved, and finalized somewhere far above her pay grade. He continues before she can speak, explaining the optics, the board's concerns, the investors who want stability, the public narrative that demands a ring and a smile before it will sign off on a merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He calls it temporary. He calls it professional. He calls it safe. He says there will be rules, boundaries, compensation, protections. He says her career will be secure. He says nothing about how it will feel to walk into rooms where everyone believes she belongs to him. Claire looks at the contract, at the clean lines of legal language that promise clarity while hiding consequences, and then at the velvet box, unopened, its weight suggesting a symbol that means something very different to everyone else. She thinks of her mother's medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter, of the email she received that morning about departmental cuts, of how easily a decision made in this room could erase her job with a single signature. Ethan watches her with an expression that is almost kind, almost apologetic, and says softly, "You can say no." But the city outside keeps shining, indifferent and vast, and Claire understands the truth that isn't spoken yet, that no is a luxury she may not be able to afford, not tonight, not with everything balanced on the edge of his request. Claire does not answer right away. She gathers the contract and the velvet box with careful hands, as if they might shatter if she moves too fast, and leaves the office with her thoughts racing faster than the elevator descending 60 floors to street level. Outside, the city feels louder, harsher, the January wind cutting between buildings, and she walks 4 blocks before realizing she has passed her subway stop. Her phone vibrates in her pocket, another reminder she cannot ignore, the hospital billing department calling again, polite but firm, explaining that the payment plan has been adjusted and the balance is still overdue. Her mother's voice echoes in her head from that morning, soft and apologetic, saying she will manage, saying Claire should not worry, saying things she has always said even when the numbers do not add up. Claire sits on a cold bench and does the math she knows by heart. The rent due in 10 days, the student loan withdrawal hitting next week, the insurance gap that keeps swallowing her savings, and she understands the shape of the corner she is standing in. Saying no to Ethan Blackwood would be clean and simple and devastating. Saying yes would be complicated and controlled and survivable. Back in her apartment, she spreads the contract across the small kitchen table, next to a chipped mug and a stack of unopened mail. The terms are precise, almost generous, a monthly stipend. That could erase her mother's debt in less than a year, a clause guaranteeing continued employment, and a severance package she has never dared imagine. Confidentiality language that wraps around her life, like a seatbelt pulled too tight. There are rules, clear and cold, no physical intimacy, no emotional entanglement, no public contradiction, no independent interviews, and a termination date tied to the merger announcement. It reads like a job description written for a role she never applied for. She flips open the velvet box at last and sees the ring, elegant and understated, not flashy, not ostentatious, chosen to signal stability rather than romance, and the sight of it makes her chest ache in a way she cannot quite name. The next morning at the office, whispers ripple faster than emails. A calendar invite for a weekend charity dinner appears with her name attached, and the head of communications smiles at her with new interest. Ethan does not mention the proposal in public. He does not rush her. He treats her exactly as he always has, efficient, respectful, distant, which somehow makes the choice heavier. At lunch, Claire overhears two analysts discussing layoffs in hushed tones, a restructuring memo rumored to land by Friday, and she realizes how quickly security can vanish in this building of glass and steel. By evening, she is back in Ethan's office, the skyline now dark, her signature hovering over the last page. She tells him she has conditions of her own, modest but firm, that she will not lie about her background, that she will keep her job title and responsibilities, that the contract will include an exit clause if her reputation is harmed. He listens without interrupting, nods once, and agrees, surprising her with how quickly he says yes. When she signs, the pen feels heavier than it should. Ethan slides the ring toward her, but does not ask her to put it on yet. He thanks her, quietly, and says this will help both of them. As Claire leaves, she realizes the stakes are no longer just money or employment. They are her name, her dignity, and the thin line between being protected by power and being consumed by it. The contract changes everything quietly, the way important things often do, without applause or warning, and within 48 hours Claire finds her calendar rewritten by other hands, fitting scheduled. Between budget reviews, etiquette sessions placed where lunch breaks used to be, and a discreet meeting with legal to finalize the clauses she insisted on, each line initialed, each word locked in place. Ethan keeps his distance, professional to the point of restraint, speaking through assistants and memos as if to remind them both that this is still business, always business, even as the world around them begins to adjust its gaze. The ring appears on her finger for the first time on a Thursday afternoon in a small conference room. Not kneeling, not romantic, just Ethan opening the velvet box again and saying it will look strange if she does not wear it now that announcements are imminent. The band is cool against her skin, the diamond catching the fluorescent light, and she tells herself it is a uniform, no different from the badge clipped to her blazer. Training follows, efficient and relentless, a consultant explaining posture, another correcting tone, a stylist choosing colors that photograph well without drawing attention, all of it designed to make her disappear into a role that must feel authentic without revealing anything real. Claire listens, learns, adapts, the way she always has, but some part of her stays alert, cataloging each rule as a boundary she will not cross. No spontaneous affection, no unscripted interviews, no contradictions in public. If asked about the engagement story, she repeats the approved version, a private introduction, shared values, mutual respect. Respect is the word Ethan favors, using it like a shield. At their first public appearance together, a fundraiser held in a hotel ballroom downtown, Claire feels the weight of eyes before she sees them, donors smiling with interest, executives assessing her like an acquisition, photographers angling for the ring. Ethan offers his arm, light and formal, and she takes it, matching his pace, matching his smile, learning the choreography in real time. When someone asks how they met, Ethan deflects with practiced ease, and Claire fills the gap smoothly, her voice steady, her hands still. It works. The room accepts them. Later, in the car, silence stretches, not awkward but deliberate, until Ethan thanks her for handling the evening well and reminds her that every appearance builds momentum toward the merger. She nods, understanding the implication that success here is measured in stock prices and headlines, not feelings. Over the next week, the office treats her differently, doors opening faster, conversations pausing when she enters, a subtle recalibration that makes her both visible and strangely alone. She keeps doing her job, scheduling meetings, managing crises, refusing special treatment even as it is offered. At night, she removes the ring and places it beside the contract in her drawer, a ritual that grounds her, proof that this life has edges she can touch. Ethan never stays late when she does anymore, a change she notices but does not comment on. And when they do speak, it is about logistics, timelines, the optics of being seen together or apart. The rules hold. The arrangement functions. And yet, beneath the polish, Claire feels the tension of something unspoken, the knowledge that every agreement contains a test, and that the true cost of this contract will not be counted in dollars, but in the moment when one of them decides whether the rules were meant to protect her or to use her. The next phase unfolds with a quiet intensity that leaves little room for doubt, as Claire is ushered deeper into a world she has only ever organized from the margins. Mornings beginning with fittings in a minimalist studio where mirrors reflect a version of her that feels curated rather than discovered. Afternoons spent memorizing names of donors and board members while a consultant explains the difference between confidence and visibility, and evenings rehearsing the small rituals of proximity that signal belonging without inviting scrutiny. Ethan observes this transformation with a restraint that surprises her, offering feedback only when necessary, approving choices with a nod rather than a command, as if he understands that the illusion works best when it does not feel forced. At work, their dynamic shifts in subtle ways. Meetings where he asks her opinion openly, dinners where he listens instead of speaking first, moments that suggest trust growing in places the contract did not anticipate. Claire adapts quickly, learning to move through gala halls and private lounges with the same competence she brings to boardrooms. Her posture steady, her voice calm, her smile precise enough to reassure, without promising anything more. The press takes notice, articles praising her poise, analysts speculating about the stabilizing influence of a grounded partner, and she reads each headline with a careful distance, aware that praise can be another form of pressure. At home, she practices answers to questions she hopes will not be asked, placing the ring on her finger in front of the mirror, then removing it, reminding herself that this role has limits. One evening, after a long day of preparations for an international investor dinner, the elevator stalls between floors, lights dimming for a moment before the backup system hums to life. And in that brief pause, with no assistance and no audience, Ethan exhales and admits that he hates being watched, that every move he makes is measured against expectations he did not choose. Claire listens, offering nothing but her attention, and for the first time he looks relieved, as if the absence of judgment is a gift he rarely receives. The elevator resumes its ascent, and the moment passes, but something lingers, an awareness that beneath the roles they perform, there are people negotiating fears that do not fit neatly into contracts. At the investor dinner, Claire handles a pointed question with grace, deflecting without lying, earning a glance from Ethan that reads as gratitude rather than approval. Later, as they leave, rain slicking the streets, he drapes his coat over her shoulders without thinking, then hesitates, remembering the rules, before she reassures him with a small nod that the gesture is harmless, practical, allowed. Back in the car, they discuss logistics for the upcoming merger announcement, but the conversation drifts to music, to childhood routines, to the strange comfort of predictability, and Claire realizes she is no longer reciting lines, but responding instinctively. The arrangement is working too well, blurring edges she has worked hard to keep sharp, and she wonders whether this ease is a reward for her discipline or a test she has not yet recognized. When she places the ring beside the contract that night, she pauses longer than usual, considering how easily symbols can reshape reality, and how dangerous it might be to forget that what began as a strategy is quietly becoming something else, something that will demand a choice neither of them has prepared for. The first real test arrives without warning, wrapped in silk invitations and polite smiles, an annual foundation gala that draws board members, regulators, and the kind of press that remembers everything. And as Claire steps into the ballroom beside Ethan, she senses the shift immediately, the attention sharpening, the room measuring her not as an accessory, but as a variable. The evening moves smoothly at first, conversations flowing, donations pledged, and then Victoria Hale appears, immaculate and deliberate, a major shareholder whose influence is felt long before she speaks. She approaches with a smile that never reaches her eyes and congratulates them both on the engagement, her tone warm enough to pass, sharp enough to cut. Claire recognizes the tactic, praise as a prelude, and braces as Victoria asks how a personal assistant found herself so perfectly suited to such a public role. The question framed as curiosity, the implication clear. Before Ethan can respond, Claire answers evenly, acknowledging her background without apology, explaining her experience managing complex operations, her comfort under pressure, her commitment to transparency, each sentence measured, honest, and disarming. The circle tightens, listeners leaning in, and Victoria pivots, suggesting that appearances can distract from governance, that stability requires more than optics, that relationships born in proximity can cloud judgment. Claire holds her ground, reminding the group that governance is strengthened by competence and accountability, that personal history does not diminish professional standards, and that assumptions say more about the speaker than the subject. The room quiets, not from discomfort but recognition, and someone laughs softly, breaking the tension. Ethan watches, something like pride flickering before he reins it in, aware that any overt defense might undermine the point Claire is making. When Victoria retreats, the moment leaves a residue, a recalibration that shifts the balance of the evening. Reporters later ask about the exchange, and Claire deflects with grace, emphasizing the Foundation's mission, redirecting attention to outcomes rather than personalities, a skill honed from years of managing crises without credit. Backstage, as donors disperse, Ethan thanks her, this time without qualifiers, acknowledging that she handled a situation he could not have addressed without escalating it. The admission hangs between them, not dramatic, simply true. In the car, the city sliding past, Claire feels the adrenaline ebb, replaced by a steady resolve, understanding that tonight she did not just protect the arrangement, she protected herself. The next morning, headlines focus on the gala's success, on renewed confidence and leadership, on the calm authority of Ethan's partner, and emails arrive from colleagues who had underestimated her, their tone newly respectful. Ethan schedules a meeting to discuss boundaries, not to tighten them, but to ask what she needs to feel supported as scrutiny increases, a question the contract never required him to ask. Claire considers before answering, requesting clear communication, public acknowledgement of her role, and the freedom to speak for herself when challenged. He agrees, adding the changes as addenda that formalize what trust has begun to create. As she leaves his office, Claire realizes the test did not end on the ballroom floor. It continues in quieter ways, in how power responds when it is confronted with competence. She removes the ring that night and studies it, not as a symbol of belonging, but as proof that she can stand under bright lights without losing herself, even as the lines between performance and reality grow thinner. The days after the gala slow into something quieter, the kind of calm that follows a storm, and it is during this lull that the space between Claire and Ethan changes most noticeably, not in public where smiles and posture still matter, but in the margins of long evenings and early mornings when the building empties and the city hums below. One night, after a delayed board call stretches past 10, Claire finds Ethan on the rooftop terrace, jacket draped over a chair, skyline spread wide and indifferent, and for once he does not seem like a man in control of it. She joins him without being asked, the wind cool against her face, and they stand side by side in silence that feels earned rather than imposed. Ethan breaks it by admitting that he hates the nights after big wins, that the applause fades quickly and leaves a hollow he has never learned to fill, that leadership often means choosing between bad options and pretending the outcome was inevitable. Claire listens, offering no solutions, only presence, and he seems to relax at that, shoulders loosening as if the weight has shifted. She shares her own truth in return, that competence has always been her armor, that she learned early to anticipate needs because being overlooked felt safer than being disappointed, that this arrangement has forced her into visibility she never sought but is learning to claim. The conversation drifts to small things, to music played too loud on late drives, to routines that ground them, to the strange relief of being understood without explanation, and Claire realizes she is not checking the rules anymore. When a sudden breeze makes her shiver, Ethan hands her his coat without ceremony, no hesitation this time, and she accepts it, the warmth settling in a way that feels both ordinary and significant. They talk about the merger timeline, about the addenda they signed, about the possibility that scrutiny will intensify before it ends, and for the first time Ethan asks how this has affected her beyond logistics. Claire answers honestly, saying it has made her braver and more cautious at once, that she is learning where her boundaries hold, that she does not regret agreeing, but will not pretend it is easy. He nods, acknowledging the cost without minimizing it, and says he will protect her reputation if the narrative turns, not because the contract demands it, but because he owes her that much. The word owes lands differently than promises, grounded and accountable. Later, as they descend together, the elevator stops briefly again, light steady this time, and the pause feels intentional rather than alarming. Ethan glances at the ring on her hand and asks, quietly, if it ever feels heavy. Claire considers, then admits that it does, not because of him, but because symbols invite assumptions, and assumptions can erase choice. He thanks her for saying it, and when the doors open, he does not reach for her arm, letting her decide the distance. That night, Claire places the ring beside the contract as usual, but she does not rush the ritual, aware that the ease growing between them is both a comfort and a risk. The arrangement is still intact, the rules still written, yet something uncontracted has taken root, something that will demand clarity when secrets surface, and Claire senses that the next test will not come from a ballroom, but from the truth waiting just beyond what she knows. The truth arrives on an ordinary morning, the kind that pretends nothing is about to change. When Claire opens her inbox to prepare briefing notes and finds a forwarded thread she was not meant to see, a legal discussion marked confidential, time-stamped weeks before the gala, outlining a risk assessment tied to the merger. She reads once, then again, the language precise and bloodless, noting anticipated backlash, media narratives, and a mitigation strategy that includes positioning the engagement as evidence of stability while allowing scrutiny to settle on a non-executive partner if questions escalate. Her name appears as a variable, not a person, a buffer designed to absorb pressure so leadership can remain insulated. The room seems to tilt, not from shock alone, but from recognition. The memory of every smile she managed, every deflection she delivered, reframed as part of a calculus she never consented to. She closes the document carefully, as if the act of shutting it might restore order, and walks to Ethan's office with a calm she does not feel, passing colleagues who greet her warmly, unaware that the ground has shifted beneath her feet. Ethan looks up as she enters, reading her expression before she speaks, and the silence stretches until she asks whether he knew the plan anticipated reputational harm to her specifically. He does not deny it. He explains, measured and careful, that the assessment considered worst-case scenarios, that contingencies are not intentions, that he believed safeguards would prevent escalation. Claire listens, the words sliding past the way rain slides off glass, and then asks the question that matters, whether he would have told her if the backlash had materialized. He hesitates, and in that pause, the answer settles heavy and undeniable. She tells him she agreed to be visible, not expendable, that consent given without full information is not consent at all. He says he was trying to protect the company, the deal, the people who depend on it, and she replies that protection that requires silence from one person is not protection, it is convenience. The conversation remains civil, even gentle, which somehow makes it worse, because it confirms the distance power creates when it chooses outcomes over individuals. Claire removes the ring and places it on his desk, the sound soft but final, and states that the contract allowed for termination if her reputation was knowingly placed at risk. He protests, insisting the risk was theoretical, that he would never let it come to that, and she counters that trust is not built on intentions withheld. She leaves before he can say more, the corridor blurring as she walks, each step steady because she refuses to give the building the satisfaction of seeing her falter. At home, she opens the drawer where the contract rests and rereads the clauses she once initialed with such care, noting the language she fought to include, the exit she insisted upon, the proof that she anticipated harm even if she hoped it would not come. Messages begin to arrive, apologies and explanations, promises of corrective statements, offers to make it right, and she turns the phone face down, choosing quiet over reassurance. That night, the city hums as always, indifferent to fairness, and Claire understands that what nearly destroyed her was not the scrutiny or the pressure, but the realization that she had been protected only so long as she remained useful. In that clarity, she chooses herself, knowing the next step will cost her comfort, certainty, and proximity to power, but will return to her something far more fragile and essential, the right to decide what risks her name will bear. The fallout is swift and quieter than headlines, unfolding in conference rooms and private calls where consequences are measured and choices recorded, and Ethan feels the cost in ways numbers cannot soften as directors question the ethics of the mitigation plan and regulators request clarifications that no longer accept vague assurances. He does not deflect this time. He authorizes a full disclosure to the board, acknowledging the assessment, the omission, and his failure to inform Claire fully, and when advisors suggest reframing the narrative to preserve leverage, he refuses, choosing transparency even as it tightens the margin. The merger timeline slows, investor confidence wavers, and a vote strips him of a portion of discretionary authority, a symbolic cut that signals accountability without spectacle. He accepts it, understanding that power retained at the expense of trust is already diminished. Meanwhile, Claire keeps her distance, returning to her routines with deliberate steadiness, notifying legal of the termination per the contract, documenting timelines, and declining invitations to private conversations that promise closure without responsibility. She receives a public statement drafted in her favor, carefully worded, and she revises it herself, removing euphemisms, insisting on clarity that names the failure without vilifying, protecting her integrity without exploiting sympathy. When the statement is released, it surprises the market, not for drama but for restraint, acknowledging her role, her consent boundaries, and the corrective steps taken, and the tone resets from speculation to respect. Ethan requests a meeting through counsel rather than assistance, asking for 30 minutes on neutral ground, and Claire agrees with conditions: daylight, glass walls, no intermediaries. When they sit across from each other, he does not justify. He apologizes without qualifiers, names the harm precisely, and states the remedies he has already implemented, including an independent review and a governance change that ensures no future non-executive partner can be positioned as a shield without explicit, informed consent. He offers to support her career publicly without attaching it to his own, to step back from any narrative that centers him, and to accept whatever decision she makes regarding their personal connection. Claire listens, weighing the difference between remorse spoken and repair enacted, and asks one question: whether he would make the same choice again if the deal were at risk. He answers no, simply, understanding that the word carries weight only because it costs him something now. Days later, he announces the dissolution of the engagement officially, not as a strategy, but as a correction, returning the ring to the firm's vault with a note that records its use and retirement, a small act that signals an end to symbols misapplied. Claire watches from a distance as the company absorbs the impact and stabilizes, her inbox filling with opportunities she evaluates on her terms, choosing roles that value clarity and consent. When Ethan sends a final message acknowledging her autonomy and stating he will not pursue her unless invited, she recognizes the boundary for what it is, a relinquishment rather than a tactic. In the quiet that follows, both learn the shape of repair, not as a performance, but as a sequence of choices that restore agency where it was taken, and Claire senses that whatever comes next, it will begin without contracts disguising power as protection. Time settles the way dust does after movement, slowly and without ceremony, and months later Claire's life looks quieter from the outside, steadier in ways that do not require explanation, a role she chose at a firm that values process and consent, mornings that begin without headlines, evenings that end with books, and walks that clear her thoughts. She hears about Blackwood Tower less often now, only when a reform passes or a governance change is cited as a case study, and when she does, she feels no pull to return, only a measured respect for distance maintained. The invitation arrives by mail rather than message, handwritten, brief, requesting her presence at a small community forum on ethical leadership, where she had once advised from behind the scenes, and she attends because the cause aligns with her principles, not because of who will be there. Ethan is present, not as a host, but as a participant, seated among others, listening more than speaking. And when their eyes meet, there is no claim in the look, only recognition of shared history handled with care. Afterward, he approaches with permission in his posture, asking if he may walk with her to the corner, and she agrees because choice is the foundation now. They speak about work, about the patience required to rebuild trust, about the relief of clarity, and when he thanks her again, it is without expectation, a closing of a circle rather than an opening of a door. Days pass, then weeks, and they meet again by coincidence at a lecture, then by invitation to coffee, each time with explicit consent, each time with boundaries honored, and something new grows precisely because it is not rushed or leveraged. When Ethan finally asks whether she would consider seeing him outside shared spaces, he does so plainly, acknowledging the past, naming the risk, and stating he will accept a no without consequence. Claire considers, not from fear or pressure, but from an honest assessment of who they have become, and she says yes, slowly, with terms spoken aloud and respected. Their relationship unfolds without spectacle, no announcements, no symbols borrowed for reassurance, only actions that align with words, apologies that remain accountable, and trust built in increments. On a quiet afternoon by the river, Ethan tells her he has stepped down from roles that concentrate unchecked power, choosing structures that invite challenge, and she hears not a promise but a pattern. He asks nothing of her name or image, offering partnership without possession, and when he reaches for her hand, he waits, letting her decide the moment. Claire takes it, not because a contract binds them, but because autonomy does, and the choice feels light in her palm. Later, when the question of commitment arises, it does so without rings or scripts, framed instead as a mutual agreement to continue choosing one another with honesty and the right to leave if honesty fails. Claire accepts, defining the terms together, equals in language and intention. The city moves on, indifferent as ever, but within the small radius of their lives, a different order holds. One where love is not a shield for power nor a performance for stability, but a practice of consent renewed, where the mistakes that once nearly destroyed her become the measure by which they refuse to repeat them, and where the future, uncontracted and chosen, finally belongs to them both.